A new universe called to me, and I answered, ignorant of the harm in crossing over.
Victor Eastmore, Apology to Resonant Earth, transmission date unknown. At the time, Victor had nothing close to the truth about Jefferson's secret messages and plans for conspiracy and counter-conspiracy.
If I go blank here, people know what to do. Out there, I don't know what would happen.
The good people of semi-autonomous California aren't lining up to save you. Sika is the problem. It's the good versus evil Cathar mindset.
He couldn't afford to dream. Until he found a cure, his blanking episodes made him a danger to everyone.
Hello to everyone watching. I'm Joshua from the content team at Spoken. For those discovering us for the first time, Spoken is the place where writers easily self-publish, socialize, and monetize an audio version of their work using AI. At the same time, Spoken provides a new kind of network for readers to discover, stream, and support the writers they love. And we're here with one of those writers today. We're here with author Cody Sisco. Cody is an author, editor, publisher, and literary community organizer, among other things. So, hey, Cody, so happy to have you here. Your talents and stories are a fantastic addition to Spoken. So for those watching, is there a thing or two you'd like to share about yourself? Little intro, if you will.
Oh, well, thanks, Joshua. Yeah. I guess what I want to share is that I write science fiction, but I write what have been called cautionary utopias. So they're books that look at how our world could be organized differently in terms of politics and our relationship to technology. And so it was really interesting for me to find a tool and a platform like Spoken where we're really kind of figuring out what this new creative economy looks like in terms of audio works and literary works brought into the audio world. So yeah, it's super interesting.
Absolutely. I think so as well. And so the work at hand here, you know, an excerpt of this novel, Broken Mirror, was originally selected as a 2025 Spoken staff pick. Congratulations again, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's something that we as a content team sort of curate when we go through the Spoken library, just finding works that really stand out and utilize the tools that we have in a really compelling way, and stories themselves that just feature great writing. So it was thoroughly enjoyed by our entire content team here. So I guess now that that same work has been published as a full-length audiobook, which you created in the Spoken studio, which is amazing, considering the length of it. What has it been like to take that story from a single excerpt that you produced in Spoken Studio to this like fully realized 53-chapter first novel audiobook for Spoken?
Yeah. I think I started checking Spoken out like back in the fall, and it was a previous version. I know it's still in beta, but the previous version you could upload, a few chapters, but it didn't yet have the functionality to upload like a full, audiobook broken down by chapter and work with it that way. So that kind of happened, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I can, and for me, I think it's important to think about, especially when we're talking about multi-character narration, to think about what is this art form. We're very familiar with the kind of standard audiobook format where it's one narrator who's also voicing the characters. And there's really subtle variations in that performance to tell you when it's narration and when it's a character talking. But what Spoken has created with multi-character narration is almost closer to like a radio play where, if the writing and the performance come together in the right way, these characters really kind of come alive, and you start to, imagine them in their surroundings. And it's just a new kind of different form than authors like me would have been able to create. Because if you were to try to bring together 50 plus characters in an audiobook narration, I mean, that's absurd. It wouldn't be possible. So it's really kind of cool how, me in the studio can pull in these real actors' voices, their voice prints, and use them as part of this almost like orchestral composition in translating the book into an audiobook.
Yeah, that was a huge point for me, looking at the work, seeing, I mean, there's a boatload of characters. I think there's around 50, right?
Yeah. I think so. Phil did a shout out earlier today. Phil Marshall from Spoken, one of the co-founders, did a shout out today, and he said there were 54. And I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that. It's like,
right.
So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and 54 characters. I mean, I've listened to it, and it's a lot of, I mean, a huge portion of those 54 characters have weight. They have, you know what I mean? Like, those are well realized characters. So, I mean, on that note, one really interesting choice that you made was to use narration exclusively from the voice actors,
right
in our library. So I guess I wanted to know what led you to that decision, A, and then B, if you were looking for something in particular in using those voice actors, did the results meet your expectations there?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. I think there's two kind of considerations. Maybe there were more, but the main two that were on my mind were really about the economics and about the creative process. So on the economic side, I think, myself, many other authors are still a bit frustrated and angry that the first generation of generative AI kind of came in without regard for copyright and just sort of hoovered up all of this content and didn't really think about how this would impact the creative economy and how creators like myself, like graphic designers, would be affected. So for me, it's really important as I'm engaging in this space to think about what are the companies, the platforms, the technologies that are going to create economic opportunity for indie authors, and specifically where we have a place that is at the center of those platforms, that we are rewarded for our work and we can connect to our readers in a way that's direct and productive. So that's the economic side. On the creative side, it was really an interesting challenge to go through what I think of as a casting process. So there are via 11 Labs, many different voice actor voice prints that can be cloned and used in a project. There are also synthetic voices that can be used. And I really wanted to focus only on those voice actors, because again, like, if we're talking about how will the audiobook market change over time, we want to make sure, and how AI plays a role in that. We want to make sure that those voice actors, have a place in there. And these are folks who have voluntarily kind of licensed their voice prints, which is really cool. So I went through that creative process looking at, does this voice match the vision for the character? And, there's no perfect match, right? There's when you're looking at, I'm creating imaginary worlds. As a writer, I can describe a character or have that character's dialogue, give them any sort of attributes that I am able to pull off, that I can do convincingly. But with something like this, where it's a casting call, you really have to match what's possible with what your intention is. And there's never a perfect match. So going through was really interesting. I definitely prioritized the main characters. So there's two. There's Victor and Elena, whose friend relationship is very fraught, but it's they're at the core of the story. And then there's Victor's family, who plays a really big role, and then sort of a limited cast who are with him all along his journey through that first book and into the subsequent books. So there was really about maybe a dozen characters that I had to get absolutely right. And that process was a lot of trial and error. It was selecting one and then living with it for a little while and then going like, yeah, that works. That's great. I can really be confident in that. Versus others, I was like, oh no, we got to switch this up a little bit later and go back and fix that. So that was a lot of fun, actually, because even just hearing different voice clones takes on specific dialogue is kind of eye-opening as an author, because we envision how a character says something, but as we all know with adaptation, actors can have very varying takes and varying performances of those same words. So that was a lot of fun, but it was. I can't really recommend it enough as like an exercise almost in terms of seeing your work come to life.
Very true. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's exactly like you said. It lives in the world of adaptation, and the way you envision the story in your head and these characters in your head, and then seeing the way these different voice actors are performing them. Were there ever any moments where it was like a 1-to-1, like that was Victor, or that was, that character to a T?
Yeah. There were plenty of those moments. I mean, I think, there's, it would be an interesting process to go through and like map out like what percentage felt like spot on and what percentage felt like close, but not quite there. And then what percentage actually required a re-record, which is one of those features where I can speak the line. It's almost like a really bossy director coming in and saying, I really want you to say it just like this. Yeah. Which no one's feelings were hurt in the production of this audiobook. So I feel okay about that. But yeah, it'd be interesting to think about how those break down. And I know that the team is kind of constantly iterating and looking at new features. And so I expect as this technology matures, the authors will get, I hope, some additional controls over how those voice print performances work for specific lines. And I'm thinking, specifically like you can have a very hushed, whispered scene followed by like one that's like full of, big action and drama. It would be wonderful to have a set of controls that can kind of dial in different vibes or different, not literally volume, but kind of like emotional volume. Like some scenes, they're pretty mid, and then some are like really accentuated and high stakes. So I think that when you're working with a cast, like if you were working with an actual actor, you would have that opportunity as a director to kind of give some input. It would be good to have something analogous in this kind of creating environment.
Yeah, those emotional fine-tuning controls they're really next level, right? That's where we get into the territory of like you are sitting back into the seat that you were in when you wrote the book, and you're imagining this world layer by layer. I think that those tools are coming down the stream, maybe quicker than we anticipate, and I'm super excited for those as well. I want to go more into tools in a second, but I just realized, and I want to give a little context for the story for those watching, to understand the weight of these character choices, the voice casting. So the spoken analysis describes Broken Mirror as a sci-fi novel exploring a dystopian future, genetic conspiracy, mental health, and family secrets, centered on Victor Eastmore, a man with a mysterious condition. In a parallel USA, it unravels political intrigue and the unsolved death of his grandfather. Is there anything else you want to explore further with your story you want to present to the audience here?
I would, yes. I think that's a very good introduction. I think I would just add that, that subtle, flavor of, what is dystopia? What is utopia? What is the purpose of, setting a story, not in our world, but in a world that's maybe uncannily familiar? And I think that's one of the things that readers tell me they enjoy so much, is the Resonant Earth world, which is kind of an alternate history version of our world. And that's always a lot of fun too.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the tool front, to go back to that, in this process, aside from those emotional fine-tuning controls, are there any other features or, dream features that you'd if you could imagine up any feature that Spoken could have, what would one or two of those be?
I mean, I think that there's some fine-tuning that's maybe not too sexy, but fine-tuning in just how the audio is mastered, in terms of, what it what it is really a collection of clips that come together into that final kind of listening experience. And there are moments where that can be a little choppy. So I think that some fine tuning of that, I'm sure is being worked on. But the thing that's really exciting for me is to think about Spoken as kind of a platform where people discover new work and maybe learn more about it. So yesterday I was doing one of those really fun things that we do as independent authors of like building the welcome sequence when someone signs up to my newsletter. And it has all sorts of little extras like related short stories and backstory and, deleted scenes, like really fun kind of little extra bits and bobs. And, to the extent that that is something that the platform can enable, that kind of sharing of the work around the work, I think that'll be really interesting. Like we've talked a little bit before about, like how do podcasts really fit in with the Spoken platform? And like this interview, like does it get translated into different languages on the platform? So yeah, I think the more it can be a kind of like meeting place for authors and readers, that could be really fun.
Yes, absolutely. I really, really see the benefit now more and more being on the platform and just this community aspect of it and seeing it come together in places like Reddit and Discord and seeing yourself and other authors really engage there, share ideas, share work. To what extent would you see yourself using the platform in that regard? If there was a community built into the site where you could, host your own playlists, your own webinars per se,
Yeah, launch party. Woo!
Yeah.
New
absolutely.
work coming out. Let's hang out. Yeah, I love that idea. The other thing I would share, like if there's any indie authors listening to this, it's kind of addictive. Like I've now just completed like you said, like 54 chapters of a novel, and I'm like, okay, so when do I put the sequel up on the platform? Like, I know I need to take a little bit of a break and focus on some other work priorities. But I'm going to be coming back with that sequel and like the related short story, and I don't know, there's something that's really fun and satisfying about it that yeah, I don't know how to manage that. Like you don't need to cut me off, but you should maybe say, hey, take a week.
Yep. That's great. I mean, I think that's a fantastic component. We talked about that this morning, it being fun.
Yeah.
Which is something I think every creator would prefer it to be, right?
Yes. I mean, I'm contrasting that with me like writing the welcome sequence yesterday. I'm like, this is good, and I'm happy to have this conduit to share information, but it feels very broadcast. And what I enjoy more is interaction. And it, these are not good times for social media right now. And I think that any space that we can create where people can come together and talk about books and what they love about them, like that's a space I want to spend a lot of time in.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. If there's anything that you could tell an author who's maybe hesitant to use this, hasn't used anything like it before, but have that, bite of curiosity, what would it be?
I often give the advice. I'm also an editor, right? So I often give the authors I work with the advice to read their work aloud, both, to themselves so they can hear their words spoken. It helps kind of listen to how the language is moving and maybe where it's clunky or maybe where it's really, singing. I think that this is also like using your work on Spoken is another way that can happen. And you can get kind of a deeper insight into your language. And so I think from a craft perspective, it could be useful to hear your work narrated on Spoken. I'm considering for my third book, which comes out later this year, like in the fall, I'm considering doing an early release on Spoken, just because wouldn't that be fun for beta readers to come in and listen? And I don't know that there's anywhere else that can happen, right? Every other platform that exists is either focused on the written word or, audiobook platforms are all really polished. It's the final product. I don't know that there's anywhere that like you can get a peek of the not quite finished product. Or like, I mean, I'm imagining, say there's a new character in book 3, like the Diamond King. Like, what should the Diamond King's voice be? I have an opinion, but what if the readers want to override my opinion? Like, wouldn't that be fun just to like have that as like a, almost like a contest? So that was a long-winded response to your question of just saying, and I guess I would shorten it to say, you never know what will give you a new insight into your creative process or some fresh juice along the way. And for me, that's what this has done. And, why not give it a shot?
Yeah, I think that's a super compelling reason enough, right? That is reason enough, giving it a shot. And I think along the way, they'll discover a lot. It sounds like you definitely have. I know I see people discovering things every day that, it's always like these light bulb moments. And, you bring up exploring these characters, and even the characters in your story here. I know that you do have some spin-offs, correct? And so, exploring those characters through monologues on Spoken and, their character backstories. It's definitely a discovery process. So it's amazing you see it that way.
Yeah. And I've just add one more thing on the craft point is that, one of the things we try to do with fiction is to create this continuous stream that carries the reader along. And I think especially with audiobooks, it's really an interesting challenge for the writer to maintain a kind of simulacrum of the imagined reality so that the reader never drops out of it and wonders, where am I? What's going on? What do things look like? What do they sound like? I'm in a, it's talking heads and I don't understand where I am. Like with audio, you really have to stay kind of grounded in that sensory specifics and keep the pace moving, because you might skim through a boring paragraph, or maybe you skip ahead a page sometimes. I don't do that. You might, and that's fine. But with audio, it's like, okay, like this unfolds at its own pace. And so from a writing perspective, I feel like I have to imbue every sentence with that kind of holding the reader and bringing them along to where it's a satisfying conclusion.
100%. Even in Broken Mirror, I'll use it as an example. You really realize how the audio format, the audio medium it's intimate, right?
Yeah.
I know that's said a lot, but it is the truth. It's maybe the most intimate medium. It's right, it's in your brain. It's right in your brain.
Yeah.
And hearing some of these scenes unfold in Broken Mirror, with that added layer of intimacy, it adds a lot of weight and sort of shock to particular moments that happen. I won't spoil anything, but there were moments there, just hearing the characters' voices and how they're reacting and responding to one another in light of a particular, action that took place. It was heavy. It was heavy to experience or to listen to. So that's really fascinating from a listener's point of view, I think, is getting that experience from these stories.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I like what you say about being an intimate format. I think that Broken Mirror, with the emphasis on Victor's mental illness and his struggle to know what is real, I mean, that puts the reader in exactly the place I want them, or the listener, you might say, where, they're really going through this journey with him. And part of it is, is it paranoia, or is someone, really out to get him? And that, trigger warning or content warning, I don't know. It's a really creepy experience, and that's what I'm aiming for. So if you're into creepy experiences, then that might be one you want to check out.
Absolutely. So, I wanted to kind of open things up if there's anything else outside of what I've discussed that you wanted to explore. But on the topic of making works, in audio work, I wanted to say or ask you if there was one classic novel, past or present, that you could take and have completely reimagined using the studio, now that you know the studio very well. What would you choose? You think it deserves the spoken treatment?
Well, I have trouble narrowing it down to one, so I'll give you two. And these are two that have been on my mind for a long time where I've wanted to do like a modern adaptation or like a reimagining synthesis. And so one is well, actually I have them right here. One is Orlando by Virginia Woolf, which is a story of a character who kind of moves through different genders as their I haven't read it in a long time, but I remember being just like wowed by this book when I read it, like as a young adult. And then the second is Roxana by Defoe. I want to say Daniel Defoe, but that sounds like the actor. Hold on a minute. Daniel Defoe. Yeah. Okay. So I was right. Maybe it's okay. I was thinking William Defoe, but it is Daniel. I was right. Okay. And that is the story of basically it's like I want to say 16th century, but maybe it's 17th century woman who is in charge of her own fate. She is sometimes a sex worker, I think, and just like tries to live as an independent person at a time when women were not allowed to. And so, like really, really interesting kind of historical works that could be good for people to read now or for a reinterpretation.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for sharing those.
Yeah.
I guess before we wrap things up, is there any other area that you feel is, maybe an exciting area to explore we haven't talked on yet?
Yes. And this is one where I'm like kind of excited and also a little scared. So, where we're at with like generative artificial intelligence technologies, we're almost to the place where based on a written or audio text, you could get like kind of live video generated alongside that. So like you're listening to an audiobook, you open up Spotify, and then there you go. There's like an actual like visual representation of what's going on in the scene. And I should have said spoken, not Spotify, because you guys will get there first. But it's interesting to think about when technology enables a lot of other stuff, how to keep focus on the sort of like creative person's intent. Like I talked a lot about the casting element with spoken, which is really interesting, but it's a whole other dimension of complexity if we talk about sort of video generated on the fly. And that, could be great, or it could be like really weird, or anywhere in between. So that's something I'm going to keep my eye on as like, what is going to happen with that?
Yeah, I think that there are so many areas that are growing rapidly in the technology space, even, augmented reality, virtual reality.
Yes.
And imagining how those might come into play, where all of these mediums sort of meet. They're all going to meet at one point.
Yep.
And create an entirely novel experience. And it's wild. I agree. It's scary. It's exciting.
Yeah. One thing I think could be good, and probably sooner rather than later, is that we still so much have a kind of 2D experience of browsing for books or audiobooks. We're on a screen, there's an array of things, and you're like, okay, which one? I would love to have something more immersive, like augmented or virtual reality, where like basically a virtual bookstore. You wander in and the stories are around you, and you get to like kind of check them out, move past them, see if it's something you want to enter. And then maybe you just like actually enter through a portal, and now you're in that story world, right? So thinking about how kind of, I guess you'd call it the metaverse, and like giving Neil Stephenson full credit for introducing that concept back in the 90s. I would love to see that manifest somehow with books and stories and our ability to like enter into these imaginary worlds.
Mm-hmm. Spoken as a virtual library in the metaverse. There we go. Walk into each of those books worlds. Yeah, that's amazing. You have it seems to me, you have like a really strong foundation in technology, science, biology. Do you have a background in those fields at all, or is it just a passion?
I mean, I think part of it is that I came of age when the internet was new. And so was in it, from a time of like coding with HTML, and back when the first wave of blogs hit in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And I've just, kind of stayed on top of things since then. I will say we're living on the worst timeline in terms of what this technology does for us. Like, social media is like not what it could be. And I think there's now kind of a realization like, oh, when we allow commercialization of all these different spaces, that just like makes us feel shitty. So I think, it hasn't happened yet, but I think better platforms, better spaces are coming, but it's going to be interesting to see how those evolve.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah, maybe it's my science fiction background where I'm like, I've been thinking about all this stuff for a really long time when it wasn't possible. And now it seems like it's getting to be possible.
I know. By the day, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah,
it is. Well, Cody, this has been awesome. It's been incredible. Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your process, your vision, and your experience with Spoken. It's been inspiring to see how you've used the platform. I'm excited to see how you continue to use it and the things you discover and offer up by way of suggestion and innovation. So can't wait to hear what you create next. Thanks so much.
Me too. Thanks for this opportunity. It's great to talk to you, Joshua.
Thank you. And for those watching, that's www.spoken.press. And find us on social media. Connect with us directly in our discussions on Reddit and Discord. And thank you so much for watching.
See ya.